The cameras were already rolling when Kellyanne Conway leaned forward, her voice slicing through the studio like broken glass. Her hand jabbed the air, finger trembling with fury as the studio lights glared down, catching every sharp edge of her expression. The set, designed for calm conversation, had suddenly transformed into a battlefield. Viewers at home felt it instantly. The tension, the electricity, the sense that something volatile was about to erupt. Kellyanne's words came rapid and hot, not just spoken but hurled, each syllable designed to dominate, to overwhelm, to silence. She wasn't debating. She was attacking. She wanted control, the spotlight, the power to dictate the room. And for a moment, it seemed she had it. The host froze, caught between referee and bystander, while producers in the control booth whispered frantically. Social media lit up in real time, tweets firing off, clips already being cut, captions screaming, "Kellyanne's on the attack again!" The camera cut to Jasmine Crockett. She sat still, her hands folded, her eyes steady, her posture unshaken. It was the image of composure in the face of chaos. The audience, expecting the explosion, leaned forward. Every instinct told them Jasmine would fire back, that she would match the volume, the rage, the storm that Kellyanne was unleashing. That was the script Kellyanne had written. Shout louder, dominate harder, drown the opponent in noise. But then came the pause, the smallest pause, almost imperceptible, as Jasmine drew a breath. Her silence cut deeper than Kellyanne's screams. It was the kind of silence that unsettled, that shifted the balance of power without a single word. The audience could feel it. Something was happening here, something different, something unforgettable. The cameras zoomed in, framing the clash not as equals, but as opposites. Arrogance and noise on one side, dignity and calm on the other. And while Kellyanne's voice strained louder, Jasmine's restraint became louder still. No one in that studio realized they were witnessing the beginning of a viral storm. No one knew that in just seconds, Jasmine's response would ricochet across the internet, rewrite the tone of the night, and turn this heated exchange into a defining political moment. The audience thought Jasmine would snap back. Instead, she did something no one expected. What followed turned into the most talked-about political takedown of the year. The clash didn't happen in a vacuum. The network had billed the segment as a fiery debate on integrity and accountability in American politics, a subject already sparking anger and division nationwide. Viewers tuned in expecting friction, but no one expected an eruption. The host had tried to frame the night as a balanced conversation. One side defending the old guard of political spin, the other pushing back with the fresh voice of a new generation. But from the moment Kellyanne Conway's microphone was hot, balance evaporated. She launched not into argument, but into accusation, dismissing facts, dismissing the other guest, and dismissing the very premise of the conversation. It was classic Conway, not about truth, but about volume, not about clarity, but about chaos. Her entire style had always been rooted in one thing. If you yell loud enough, twist hard enough, confuse long enough, you can make people forget what the original question even was. That night, she doubled down on the formula. Her tone wasn't just sharp, it was hostile, almost daring someone to push back. The audience at home recognized it immediately. Social media started pulsing in real time. Kellyanne is unhinged. She's drowning the host. This is rage politics in action. It wasn't debate. It was domination theater. And for a few minutes, it seemed to be working. The host, visibly flustered, stumbled over attempts to regain order. His voice grew smaller, while Kellyanne's rose higher. She leaned forward, her jabs coming harder, her face lit with the certainty that she had the upper hand. But across from her sat Jasmine Crockett, steady as stone. She did not flinch. She did not match fire with fire. And that stillness, so unusual in the world of live political television, started to change the energy in the room. Viewers began tweeting again, this time in awe. How is Jasmine staying this calm? The restraint is incredible. She's letting Kellyanne bury herself. In that moment, the stage was no longer neutral ground. It became a symbolic battlefield. On one side, Conway, the embodiment of age politics, loud, chaotic, seeking dominance through fear and force. On the other side, Crockett, representing a new kind of resistance, measured, composed, letting dignity speak louder than noise. The tension was unbearable. The host glanced nervously between the two women, trying to cut in, his voice cracking as he said, "Ladies, let's keep this civil." But no one was listening to him anymore. The battle had escaped his control. It wasn't just television now. It was a metaphor unfolding in real time. The past screaming at the future. The old way of power trying to intimidate the new. And the audience felt it. You could almost hear the collective heartbeat of millions leaning closer to their screens, waiting to see if Jasmine would finally explode under the pressure. That was the script everyone expected. Kellyanne shouting, Jasmine snapping, chaos reigning, the host eventually pulling the plug. It was the script rage politics had always written, one America had seen too many times. But Jasmine wasn't following that script. She was writing a new one. Her silence stretched, her eyes locked on Kellyanne, her composure unnerving. Not only the opponent across from her, but the viewers watching in disbelief. Everyone thought they knew what was coming next. They thought Jasmine would raise her voice, cut bow, with venom, let the clash spiral into the circus Kellyanne wanted. They were wrong. Because what Jasmine said next, no one saw coming. Not the host, not the audience, and certainly not Kellyanne Conway herself. To understand the weight of what unfolded that night, you first have to understand who Kellyanne Conway has always been. For years, she stood as one of the sharpest architects of America's rage politics, an operator who didn't just step into the storm, but learned to command it. Her career had been built on turning debates into battlegrounds, bending truth into weapons, and wielding confusion like a shield. She was not the type to retreat, not the type to concede. She was the strategist who gave the nation one of its most infamous phrases, alternative facts. That line wasn't just a slip of the tongue. It was her manifesto. It was the encapsulation of an entire playbook, where facts could be bent, reality could be reshaped, and perception could be manipulated at will. When Kellyanne stepped into any room, she knew she had an edge. Not because her arguments were stronger, but because she had perfected the art of deflection. Ask a question about integrity, and she would answer with fear. Press her on policy, and she would pivot to personality. Challenge her narrative, and she would simply talk louder, faster, sharper, until her opponent was left looking small, flustered, or drowned out completely. For years, this strategy worked. On cable news stages across America, Kellyanne carved a reputation as the guest who couldn't be cornered, the pundit who could spin any moment into her advantage. She smiled while twisting the knife, laughed while rewriting the premise of the argument, and always managed to walk away as though she'd won. To her supporters, this was brilliance. To her critics, it was manipulation at its finest. Either way, she remained a force that producers booked not because she was enlightening, but because she guaranteed spectacle. And spectacle was her power. She never needed to win hearts, only headlines. She knew that if her voice dominated, if her face was the one on screen, the mission was complete. Substance didn't matter. Dominance did. And in a media landscape hungry for ratings, Kellyanne Conway was both poison and fuel. But over time, the cracks began to show. The audiences who once laughed at her audacity grew tired of it. The constant twisting, the relentless shouting, the refusal to acknowledge even the simplest truths. It became less clever, more exhausting. Viewers began to see the pattern. They saw how she evaded, how she deflected, how she turned every interview into a maze designed to confuse rather than clarify. And as the years passed, her style came to symbolize something larger, the arrogance of a political machine that believed it could bend reality indefinitely without consequence. Still, Kellyanne never shifted course. She believed in the formula that had carried her this far: volume over virtue, spectacle over substance. If her opponents came at her with facts, she came back with force. If they tried to speak with dignity, she buried them in derision. It was a method honed from years in the trenches of political warfare, where civility was weakness and dominance was survival. So when she sat across from Jasmine Crockett that night, Kellyanne leaned on the only weapon she had ever truly trusted: noise. She came in fast, sharp, and merciless. She jabbed with her finger, raised her voice, stretched her words into ridicule. It was the same playbook that had rattled countless hosts and silenced countless guests. And as the studio lights burned and the cameras rolled, Kellyanne looked certain, absolutely certain, that she could bulldoze her way through another opponent. But what she didn't account for was the shifting mood of the nation. The fatigue had reached its peak. Viewers were no longer impressed by the spin. They were no longer entertained by the shouting. They were looking for something else, something steadier, something real. And sitting across from Kellyanne was not another pundit ready to play by her rules, but a congresswoman who embodied precisely what America was hungering for: calm dignity in the face of chaos. The irony was sharp. Kellyanne had built a career silencing others with her volume, believing dominance was the only path to victory. Yet in this moment, the very tools that had once made her formidable now revealed her hollowness. The louder she shouted, the more obvious it became that there was nothing beneath the noise. The sharper she jabbed, the more desperate she looked. And Jasmine, without raising her voice, was about to show the country that silence, composure, and truth carried more weight than 1,000 alternative facts. Kellyanne Conway had spent years bending debates to her will, years silencing opponents through sheer force. And yet, despite years of silencing others, this time her tactics were about to fail. Before Jasmine Crockett sat beneath the studio lights, her composure unshaken and her eyes unflinching, she had already lived 1,000 battles. To millions of viewers, she seemed like a sudden force bursting onto their screens, a young congresswoman holding her ground against a seasoned political warrior. But Jasmine's story didn't begin in Washington, and it certainly didn't begin in the theater of cable news. Her story began in the quiet grit of everyday struggle, in the courts and streets where justice was not a slogan, but a fight. Long before the cameras, Jasmine was a lawyer fighting for people who didn't have the money, the connections, or the privilege to defend themselves. She walked into courthouses where her clients were dismissed before they ever spoke, where the weight of the system pressed down hardest on the shoulders of the poor and marginalized. She was the voice in rooms where no one wanted to listen, the steady advocate who refused to let power steamroll those who had none. Every time she rose in those courts, she faced louder voices, stronger institutions, and sharper hostility. And every time, she learned that composure wasn't just a tactic, it was survival. Her activism carried that same fire. When her community cried out against injustice, Jasmine was there. She wasn't the type to sit on the sidelines or issue empty statements. She marched. She organized. She stood shoulder to shoulder with the people who demanded that America live up to its promises. Her voice wasn't born in polished TV studios. It was honed on bullhorns in town halls and in the tense silence of courtrooms where every word mattered. Jasmine Crockett's rise to Congress was never inevitable. It was uphill, every step. As a young black woman, she entered spaces where power was guarded like a fortress. She knew the looks, the dismissals, The patronizing interruptions that came not because she lacked brilliance, but because she dared to exist in places where people like her had long been told they didn't belong. She didn't just carry her own ambition. She carried the weight of history, of ancestors who had been silenced, of communities that had been ignored. Each debate, each campaign, each legislative fight was never just about policy. It was about proving that dignity and determination could break through walls designed to keep her out. By the time she won her seat, Jasmine had already mastered what so many underestimated: the art of staying grounded while storms raged around her. Washington was filled with noise, shouting matches on the House floor, pundits sparring on every channel, politicians clawing for attention. But Jasmine's strength wasn't in being the loudest, it was in being the clearest. Her presence was its own argument, a reminder that representation mattered, that truth could still cut through chaos, that the future didn't have to look like the past. And it was that presence that made her a target for someone like Kellyanne Conway. To Conway, politics was piguciency. Performance and performance meant dominance. To Jasmine, politics was service, and service meant holding steady, no matter how much noise tried to knock her off course. Their collision was inevitable. It was the embodiment of two Americas. One clinging to old tactics of rage and deflection, the other insisting on a new kind of leadership, one rooted in truth, calm, and identity. That night, as Kellyanne's voice grew sharper, Jasmine's stillness became even more striking. It wasn't accidental, it wasn't passive. It was the product of a lifetime spent holding firm in rooms where she was underestimated, where she was shouted over, where she was told she didn't belong. Her calm wasn't weakness. It was weaponized strength, sharpened from years of surviving spaces built to silence her. And as the nation watched, they weren't just seeing a congresswoman on live TV. They were seeing the echo of every courtroom where Jasmine had stood tall against injustice, every protest where she had raised her voice for those ignored, every barrier she had broken simply by walking into the room and refusing to leave. This wasn't just politics. This was identity, history, and resilience colliding with arrogance, bluster, and spin. And while Kellyanne threw the same tired weapons she always had, Jasmine brought something rarer, something stronger, authenticity rooted in lived struggle. In that studio, under those lights, Jasmine wasn't just defending herself. She was defending everyone who had ever been shouted down, everyone who had been told they didn't have the right to speak, everyone who had been silenced by louder, older, more powerful voices. She carried them with her in her silence, in her composure, in the calm steadiness that made Kellyanne's fury look desperate by comparison. The cameras caught more than a debate that night. They captured the moment when the past tried to scream own the future, and the future refused to blink. This was more than a TV clash. It was the test she'd been preparing for her whole life. The air inside the studio grew heavier with every word Kellyanne Conway spat out. Her voice, already sharp, climbed higher, cracking with intensity as she leaned into the microphone, speaking over both the host and Jasmine Crockett without hesitation. She jabbed her finger again, cutting Jasmine off mid-sentence, throwing out accusations faster than the host could even register them. The set that had been designed for civil discourse now felt like a courtroom under siege, with Kellyanne acting as judge, jury, and executioner. The host tried once, twice, 3 times to interject. His face showed the strain, a forced smile melting into visible panic as he raised his hand, leaned toward Kellyanne, and said, "Let's keep this orderly, please. Let's allow Representative Crockett to..." But before he could finish, Kellyanne's voice rolled right over him, drowning his words in a torrent of interruptions. The power dynamic in the room seemed to tilt. For decades, Kellyanne had thrived in this kind of chaos. Her strategy was simple. If you never let the other side breathe, They never get the chance to land their point. But this time, something was different. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice to match Kellyanne's. She didn't roll her eyes or tighten her jaw in frustration. She sat steady, her posture straight, her expression calm, her gaze unwavering. She let Kellyanne's storm rage, her silence almost taunting in its patience. And in that silence, a strange shift began to take place. The louder Kellyanne became, the smaller she looked. The calmer Jasmine remained, the more powerful her presence grew. On social media, the audience was already catching it. Tweets started to flood in. "Kellyanne is losing it. How is Jasmine staying so calm right now? This is next-level composure." Memes were being born in real time, clips replayed seconds after airing. Viewers weren't just watching a debate anymore. They were watching a duel of contrasts, and Jasmine's refusal to play Kellyanne's game was fast becoming the story of the night. Inside the studio, the tension was unbearable. The host sat back now, defeated, realizing control had slipped from his hands. The camera zoomed tighter, framing the split screen. Kellyanne in motion, her hands slicing the air, her voice straining. Jasmine in stillness, her eyes steady, her lips pressed, but not trembling. It was the clash of noise and silence, of chaos and composure, of a style America had seen too many times, and a response they had been waiting years to witness. Every second Jasmine stayed calm, the pressure built. The audience at home leaned closer to their screens, almost willing her to erupt. They expected it. The sigh, the glare, the retort that would unleash the chaos Kellyanne craved. Because that was how these moments always played out. Rage breeding rage. Volume feeding volume. Surely Jasmine was about to break. Surely she was about to meet fire with fire. Kellyanne's confidence swelled. She believed she had Jasmine pinned, that her words had cornered her, that her relentless barrage had silenced another opponent. She sneered, talking faster, throwing insult after insult, spinning distractions with the speed of someone who had rehearsed this dance 1,000 times. Her playbook was in full effect, and yet, Jasmine did not move. The silence was no longer absence. It was presence. Her composure wasn't retreat, it was defiance. In that stillness, Jasmine was telling Kellyanne, "You cannot rattle me, you cannot define me, you cannot break me." The tension reached its breaking point. Viewers watching felt their breath catch, waiting for the inevitable explosion, waiting for Jasmine to finally let loose. The host glanced at her, almost begging her with his eyes to jump in and reclaim control of the chaos. Everyone expected her to break. But then came the moment that changed everything. The moment hung in the air like a held breath. Kellyanne Conway's voice, shrill and cutting, had just filled the studio with a final barrage of accusations. Her words dripped with venom, her hands animated, her finger slicing through the air like a dagger meant to draw blood from her opponent. But as the echoes of her rant faded, something else claimed the space. Silence. Not the silence of defeat, not the silence of being overwhelmed, but the silence of control. Jasmine Crockett sat there, posture firm, eyes steady. The studio lights reflected off her expression, calm and unreadable. For a second, viewers thought maybe she was rattled. Maybe Kellyanne had gotten under her skin. That's what Kellyanne herself believed, leaning back with a smirk, thinking she had won the exchange, thinking she had forced her opponent into retreat. But then, Jasmine moved, just slightly, adjusting her mic, leaning forward, her voice measured, but carrying the kind of gravity that doesn't need to shout. "Kellyanne," she began, her tone steady as a surgeon's hand. "You can raise your voice all you want. You can wave your hands, twist your words, distract the cameras, but what you cannot do is erase the truth. The line landed like a thunderclap in the stillness. The audience gasped. The host, caught between relief and anticipation, blinked rapidly as though he couldn't believe what he was hearing. On Twitter, a flood of reactions began. "Oh my God, did she just say that?" Conway's smirk faltered, but she jumped in again, her instincts screaming to interrupt. "Don't lecture me about the truth, Congresswoman." But Jasmine didn't flinch. She raised one hand, palm open, not in anger, but in calm insistence. The kind of gesture that communicates, "Your noise can't shake me." "You built a career," Jasmine continued, her voice unshaken, "on convincing people that facts don't matter. That spin is stronger than substance. But you're looking at someone who has lived the reality behind those alternative facts. You see, when you grow up watching justice denied to communities that look like yours, when you step into courtrooms where people's lives hang on whether the truth can be heard, you learn something you never mastered: restraint, dignity, clarity. Every sentence hit like a scalpel, precise, undeniable. Conway tried to push back again, louder this time, but the balance had shifted. The audience could see it. The commentators in the green room could feel it. Kellyanne's words, once sharp, now stumbled against the wall of Jasmine's calm. And then came the line that sent shockwaves beyond the studio. "You call it passion," Jasmine said, her voice now lower, more deliberate. "But the rest of us see it for what it is: desperation. Because deep down, you know that screaming at the truth doesn't make it go away." The camera caught Conway's face in that instant, the flicker of uncertainty, the brief stutter before she tried to mask it with another interruption. But the damage was done. The force field of confidence she carried into every debate had cracked. Meanwhile, Jasmine pressed on, her cadence building with quiet momentum. "This isn't just about you and me. This is about every American who's tired of being shouted over. Every young woman who's told she has to yell just to be heard. Every immigrant family who's been lied about for political points. I refuse to meet rage with rage, because my community deserves more than another shouting match. They deserve truth. They deserve accountability. They deserve to know that calm doesn't mean weak. It means unshakable." The room fell still again, but this stillness was different. It wasn't tension anymore. It was reverence. Commentators shifted in their seats, exchanging knowing glances. They had seen hundreds of debates, thousands of sound bites. But this was something else. And Twitter exploded. Tweets poured in by the second. She didn't raise her voice once, and still destroyed Kellyanne. "This is how you dismantle rage politics. Composure level, legend." Back on stage, Kellyanne's interruptions began to sputter. She cut in mid-sentence, only to stop when Jasmine paused and waited. She raised her voice, but the audience no longer rewarded her with attention. Every move she made only highlighted the contrast: noise versus clarity, chaos versus composure. Jasmine ended with a final flourish, not in volume, but in gravity. "You don't get to define me. You don't get to define the truth. And you don't get the last word, no matter how loud you shout, because the truth speaks for itself, if you let it." The mic hung there in front of her, but the metaphorical mic had already dropped. Kellyanne shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The host, wide-eyed, jumped in quickly to move things along. But it was too late. The clip was already burned into the memory of everyone watching. The dramatic reversal had happened before their eyes. The camera panned across the studio audience, some smiling, some shaking their heads in disbelief. This wasn't supposed to happen. Kellyanne had been in this arena for decades, a master of confrontation, the embodiment of aggressive political theater. But tonight, against Jasmine Crockett, she had met something stronger than her volume: poise. And the most powerful moment of all wasn't even Jasmine's words. It was the pause before she spoke. That refusal to let chaos dictate the rhythm, that insistence on stillness as strength. It wasn't just a reply. It wasn't just a soundbite. It was, as one commentator would later say, a mirror held up to arrogance, and arrogance blinked first. For Kellyanne Conway, the unraveling had begun. For Jasmine Crockett, the legend was only starting to rise. And the world watching knew one thing for certain. This was no ordinary debate. This was history being made in real time. Because in that studio, under the blinding lights and the chaos of live TV, a simple truth had emerged. Rage politics can scream all it wants, but calm, when it's earned, will always win the room. And yet, the night wasn't over. What happened next would spread beyond the studio, igniting conversations across the country, reshaping how millions saw the balance of power in political discourse. The takedown had just begun. This is why Jasmine's calm was not accidental. It was earned, forged from years of facing louder voices, sharper insults, and entrenched power. Her stillness in the face of Conway's chaos was not weakness. It was strength, weaponized in its purest form. And this is the lesson America needed. Because democracy itself doesn't survive on the lungs of the loudest. It survives on the courage of the steady, on leaders who can resist the temptation of fury, who can choose dignity over dominance, who can meet arrogance not with equal rage, but with unshakable composure. In that moment, Crockett's reply became bigger than one viral TV clash. It became a mirror for the country, a test of whether we still believe in authenticity over performance, in patience over panic, in the enduring truth that calm courage will always outlast noise. And so when Jasmine Crockett faced down Kellyanne Conway's rage and did not flinch, she wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for every person who has ever been shouted down, dismissed, or silenced. She was proving that calm is not the absence of power. Calm is power. The title of this video promised you a clash. Kellyanne Conway screaming, Jasmine Crockett answering. But what it really revealed was something far more important. It wasn't just a political skirmish or a viral meme. It was a reminder that when arrogance screams, dignity doesn't need to match the noise. It only needs to stand firm. And that's the heart of this story. Jasmine Crockett showed that leadership in the modern era doesn't come from who can shout the loudest, but from who can remain calm under fire. In a time when rage politics dominate headlines, her response cut through the chaos like a clear signal in a world of static. But here's the thing. Moments like this only make an impact if we carry them forward. If we take the lesson beyond Tuxian, he hashtags and memes, and into the way we handle a conflict in our own lives, our own communities, our own politics. So here's the challenge. If you believe calm courage deserves more spotlight than loud arrogance, don't let this moment fade. Share this video, subscribe to this channel. Be part of the movement that amplifies dignity over noise. Because as that viral moment proved, the loudest voice in the room isn't always the strongest. And when arrogance screams, dignity must still stand tall.